Welcome, friends. Thanks for stopping by. I came across a neat article from the mid-century Modern Mommy, whose link I've placed below in the description box, titled 7 Secrets of Being a 50s Housewife. Before we jump in, kindly like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I'm on the road to 1,000 subscribers and need your help to do it. I really appreciate you, and thanks a bunch, friends. Similar to myself since high school, the author Emily loved old-fashioned things and especially loved the resilient feminine superwomen who were housewives in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s. After marriage, she could not understand why it was so hard to achieve being a modern-day 50s housewife. Not knowing the first thing about what it took to be a homemaker, she read magazines and books and discovered 7 secrets of being a 50s housewife to help become one too. The 50s housewife was a mid-century minimalist. A real 50s housewife didn't spend all her time cleaning. She cleaned more thoroughly than most women do today, but she spent less time tidying her house because she had less stuff. Although consumption increased after World War II, the average household simply didn't have as much stuff as we do now. In particular, children had fewer toys. The average American child today has 200 toys and plays with 12 of them. The number one secret to being a modern-day 50s housewife is to declutter your house. The best way to do this in true 50s housewife fashion is to actually use the KonMari method. Why? Because the KonMari method doesn't only have you declutter, it teaches you to curate your style by asking, does this spark joy? And do I want this in my life going forward? And curating your style is very 50s housewife. The 50s housewife was organized. A place for everything and everything in its place is an old-fashioned motto, but housewives from the Depression to the baby boom paid attention to the simple lesson from their grandmothers. Old decorating books recommended that you plan for storage and display from the very beginning of your housekeeping. Every one of the mid-century housekeeping manuals begins with a section on management. And that section doesn't just have schedules and budgets, it also talks about organizing. As a modern-day 50s housewife, your kitchen, laundry, and sewing rooms should all be meticulously organized for efficiency and beauty. Your attitude toward organizing will be passed on to your children, and if you have a love of organized spaces, well, they might too. The 50s housewife planned ahead. The beginning of the scientific housekeeping movement, which had its heyday in the 1950s housewife era, began in the 1920s under the same auspices and the scientific management movement in business and industry. The idea was that good management was necessary for the most effective and efficient workplace, and good management meant schedules and procedures. America's Housekeeping book, published from the 1940s through the 1950s, begins with a section on planning your home and housekeeping. The first few chapters are all about management, especially planning. Planning the work, planning menus, planning for hospitality. Her schedule even included changing daily for dinner and 2 or 3 hours each week for beauty treatments like a facial and manicure. If you want to be a modern-day 50s housewife, you need to make a schedule. You'll also need a cleaning plan, a meal plan, and a self-care plan. You'll also need schedules for your kids. You may want to just collect all of the schedules and lists from vintage books and put the originals all together to have a real 50s housewife schedule. The 50s housewife acted like a French woman. A constant stream of books about fascinating feminine French female ways in the past 20 years is a reminder of how fabulous and enticing the ultra-feminine aesthetic can be. In Bringing Up Bibi, Pamela Drucker writes about how French women expect to look good and be sensual at all time. Even after they have babies, they expect to be back to va-va-voom in just a few months. Appearance and being desirable to their husbands was important to 50s housewives also. Although books promoting desirability are often mocked today, the marriage advice about the importance of staying pretty, putting your husband first, and always considering his needs and wants as more important than your own was meant in complete seriousness at the time. All this means that a modern-day mid-century mom or 50s housewife should focus on self-care. Good health, a good figure, looking pretty, cleanliness, and stylish dress are all important parts of a 50s housewife self-care routine. Create a plan for getting up early to dress and fix your hair and makeup. Work out during the day, set your hair, and bathe each evening. Also, make time each week for personal grooming tasks like hair removal and manicures. It also means that the modern-day 50s housewife focuses on her marriage rather than her kids as the most important part of the family. Try being more close to your husband whenever he suggests it, doing little things that speak his love language, and using the Good Wife's Guide as a way to welcome your husband home in the evenings. The 50s housewife took pride in her work. In Lessons from Madame Chic, Jennifer Scott talks about how her hostess made 3-course dinners every night. Food was prepared for appearance as well as taste, and the apartment. Mid-century modern housewives also took pride in having dinner ready on time, keeping their house, company ready, and acting as hostess for her husband. A 50s housewife should find something in her housekeeping that brings her joy and use it to inspire her homemaking. In general, this will fall into 5 different types: social, intellectual, domestic, creative, or civic. It may be a hobby, personality traits, or more self-care. When your own need for recreation is met, you're more likely to enjoy your domestic work and your marriage. The 50s housewife trained her children. The 50s housewife didn't parent her children, she raised them. In other words, she didn't focus on giving them an idyllic childhood, but rather focused on training them up into productive, conscientious, capable citizens. Of all the things modern-day 50s housewives miss, the most trying loss might be the loss of a society that allowed all the children in a neighborhood to play safely and act independently, with the full knowledge that every single adult would discipline them if needed. The social boundaries were there, and freedom came from staying within those boundaries. Since we can no longer do this, old-fashioned child rearing can be much more difficult, but mid-century moms are resourceful, and through a careful use of chores, independent play, and old-fashioned discipline, you can still recreate these same results. The 50s housewife was not a stay-at-home. The 50s housewife was a pillar of her community. Most of this comes from the fact that the epitome of the 50s housewife was the upper middle class suburban housewife, and the upper middle class women are the originators of charitable organizations. One of the reasons that nonprofit charities struggle so much in today's economy is less about money and more about a lack of volunteers. Actually, the same problem is faced in the home. It costs a lot to do what women in the home do for free. When housewives contributed their time and energy, more charitable work could be done. And it wasn't just charity work, it was political work, educational work, organizing, helping at school and church, and even running a club. The 50s housewife was involved in her local community and her neighborhood. As a modern-day 50s housewife, try to get to know your neighbors. Go to church or temple or whichever. Volunteer at your child's school or run a homeschool co-op. Maybe even start a ladies' club or have a weekly coffee klatch or bridge club. Get involved, make friends, and influence people. So, in summary, being a modern-day 50s housewife. Being a mid-century mom and a 50s housewife is not like how the snarky 50s housewife humor portrays it. It focuses on what is important, like taking care of yourself, putting your marriage ahead of your kids, and simplifying stuff in favor of experiences. It's not about buying too much stuff, working yourself to death, or even being bored. What do you think about being a 50s housewife? Let me know in the comments. Well, thanks again for stopping by, friends, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Toodles!